Haruki became my closest friend in the world so gradually that neither of us really noticed it happen. We met in Shinjuku at an expat meetup. I'd been transferred from my job in England a few months earlier, and had gone along to try widening my circle of friends, which at that point was less a circle than an awkward hexagonal mess, made up mostly of English people scattered at all ends of the city, who I'd set eyes on once and then only heard from in periodic Facebook posts about temples. He'd gone along to improve his English, which, as far as I could tell, was impeccable, except for the odd mispronunciation, dropping a "the" or an "a" here and there. He was from Kyoto, the old capital, though when I asked him if there was a reason for Tokyo and Kyoto being anagrams, he said he wasn't sure. He seemed to find it hilarious when I said I was from Bath, perhaps unable to disassociate the name in his head from visions of bubbling bathtubs and rubber ducks. The event was a bit mediocre, but we hit it off and agreed to meet again in Shibuya. He suggested a choice of 2 restaurants, one where the menus were all touchscreen tablets, and one with a goat in the garden. I knew nothing would put me off my food faster than a gassy goat in a cage, so we went for the one with the touchscreens. I'd thought we'd be waiting ages at the entrance, but we were shown to our seats promptly by a waitress with a smile, then sat single file in rows and selected sushi and sashimi platters from the tablets. Moments later, our meals emerged on conveyor belts via a hole in the wall. Afterwards came dessert, a bowl of ice cream on top of some cornflakes, and I made the mistake of saying that this was crazy. Haruki looked hurt. What's crazy about it? I backpedaled fervently, insisting I didn't want to cause offence, but the cafes here with their goats, rabbits, owls, cats and penguins, it all seemed a bit bizarre. Haruki didn't seem offended, but he did point out that the cafes he'd heard of in England were just as eccentric. England, he told me, possessed not only a cat cafe of its own, but a cereal cafe, a cafe made of ice, a cafe that's also a hair salon, and cafes that doubled as roller discos and bicycle repair shops. We'd even had a temporary cream egg-themed cafe at one point, and the concept of a cream egg alone seemed fairly abnormal to him, a recipe for diabetes. He did agree, though, that the Penguin Cafe was a particularly cruel concept, and he had always been in 2 minds about it. We jokingly made plans to break into it at night, complete with wire cutters and balaclavas, and liberate the birds. We got to know each other over beers in izakayas, and the occasional cup of tea, English breakfast on my part, provisions sent in care packages from friends and relatives, and matcha on his, a sort of frothy green beverage which sounds delicious on paper but is, let's say, an acquired taste. We learnt extensively about each other's backgrounds, cultures and languages. He explained the difference between the 3 writing styles, kanji, hiragana and katakana, and occasionally taught me what some of the symbols meant. His was a relatively distinctive teaching style, encouraging me to associate certain symbols with certain images. So, for example, the hiragana symbol for ku looks a bit like a crocodile, and the katakana for ha looks like an H. And the symbol for ra looks like a bowl of steaming ramen, and mu looks like a cow. It might sound unusual, but give it a week and see if you don't remember that. Haruki never stopped being intrigued by how strange Japan seemed to me. Our aim became to scour each other's countries for the most peculiar facets, and it soon became clear he was winning. Certain customs were far too alien for him to fathom. What is the point of a 90s night? He was unconvinced the 90s were anything worth celebrating, and said it seemed peculiar to be nostalgic for a time period that wasn't anything special to begin with. Citing funny outfits and Clarissa Explains It All episodes did little to convince him otherwise. After a few months, he invited me to Kyoto, where his family were based. The bullet train catapulted us to the former capital. His parents greeted us at the station and insisted on carrying my bags. His father was shy and told me immediately that his English wasn't very good, so he didn't speak much. His mother had been to Berlin and Paris 20 years earlier, which she told me about with great gusto, as if I'd been born and bred there myself. His younger sister, Setsuko, dragged herself away from a desk of complicated-looking textbooks and came to greet us, apologising for her workload, and gave us a list she'd compiled of places we should visit. That weekend, I was treated to what felt like my own personal guided tour of Kyoto, courtesy of Haruki's family. I'd thought they were just escorting us to the train station, but they boarded with us and took us to all the main temples and shrines, the Kinkakuji, the Kiyomizu-dera, the Fushimi Inari Taisha, reeling off historical facts along the way. I wondered how welcoming my own family would have been. They'd have been polite, sure, but if Haruki had expected a scenic tour, it would have been wishful thinking to say the least. For dinner, they served a mix of seafood, including one greyish piece of fish positioned on the plate in concentric circles. They told me it was fugu, or blowfish. I'd only come across it in urban legends, and that one Simpsons episode. Haruki pointed out that he didn't eat it. Having tried it several times in the past, he'd never thought it was that good, and he wasn't about to risk dying over something that was only okay. His mother seemed too fascinated by beans on toast to give blowfish a second thought, insisting that beans are something you add to a meal, not a meal on their own, which, to be honest, seems perfectly reasonable. I replied that although we may have some strange food of our own in England, none of it had the potential to kill you, except perhaps the occasional dodgy fry-up. About a month ago, Haruki messaged me and asked to meet, saying he had an announcement to make, some very big news that he could only divulge in person. In a coffee shop in Shinjuku, we ordered cups of matcha by force of habit, and he explained his situation. He'd been accepted onto a course, and would be leaving Japan for America in 2 weeks. The news plunged into my gut like a badly cooked blowfish. I did the whole best friend act, said I was happy for him, that of course I would support him. But would he mind telling me why? He said he'd basically wanted to do what I was doing, and see more of the world. Said I'd inspired him, which left me feeling pretty conflicted. But I'd promised to support him, so naturally I stuck by that. We shook hands and bowed before we parted ways. He left last week. It's astonishing how this remarkably active city lost a lot of its buzz in an instant. We still communicate. I catch snippets of what he's up to online, where he's wound up and who he's stumbled across. He told me he has about $2,500 left, and if I'm calculating correctly, that'll last about 4 more months? So he'll basically be back in the summer. More than enough time for me to get a proper plan in place for our Penguin Cafe rescue mission. Let liberation commence.